I want to turn now to the big picture of this work that I've been talking about. This work to advance the science and practice of character strengths. The critical importance of it to the progress of the human species. I recall a morning in 1997 when I opened the newspaper to read that a sheep named Dolly had been genetically cloned. The enormous power of genetic cloning was upon us, and I shuddered inside thinking of how ill-prepared we were to handle this power for the common good. At that time in my life, I had a casual custom of reading ancient Chinese and Japanese poetry. In doing so, I had been struck with how similar the human condition was 1,000 years ago compared to today. As this poem, you see, from nearly 3,000 years ago. This poem is from nearly 3,000 years ago. People fell in and out of love then and now. People fought wars then and now. Conflict is resolved with violence. Sex and greed toppled leaders long ago and now as well. In that moment, it became apparent to me that our physical powers were far outstripping our psychological readiness. Here we were, heading down the road towards cloning humans, but not even remotely prepared to deal with all of the questions attendant to that capability. Technological changes in medicine, communication, transportation, and weaponry have been amazing and fast. My grandfather was born in a world without commercial air flight and died having seen men land on the moon. We wage wars with remote-controlled drones and smart weapons. We sustain life nearly as long as we want with medical machines. In fact, last month, doctors opened my chest, took good vessels from other parts of my body and sewed them to my heart, and 2 weeks later, I was back at work with a well-functioning heart instead of dead from heart failure. Now that I have a new lease on life, what choices will I make as to how to live my life? Our physical world is drastically different today than a mere 50 years ago. On the psychological front, however, it would be hard to argue that we have matured to be more wise, humane, just, courageous, spiritual, or temperate in our behavior than our forebears. In fact, studies have shown that only about 20 to 30% of us meet the definition for flourishing, that is, having high levels of positive emotions, positive relationships, engagement in our life activities, a sense of achievement, and a sense of meaning in our activities. And about 25% of us are at the opposite end of that continuum, which is called languishing. So that leaves about nearly half the population poised for improvement. We have dozens of armed conflicts happening right now around the world, causing immeasurable violence and suffering. The approximate 875 million guns in the world result in approximately 1,000 deaths every single day. And in the US alone, there are about 500,000 incidents of gun violence per year. So I began to imagine a graph displaying two growth curves over time. One, our understanding and mastery of our physical world, and the other, our knowledge and mastery of our psychosocial world. The top line, representing our physical domain, our progress in technology, rises steeply, while the bottom line, representing our psychological maturity, our level of virtuousness, tilts only slightly in a positive direction. The gap to the right between the lines grows larger and larger as time marches on along the x-axis. This gap represents a danger zone for our species. This gap is like the jaws of an alligator. It's a danger zone. The wider they stretch apart, the harder they eventually slam shut. If we continue to acquire powers over our physical world without appropriate attention to growing our character, we seem doomed to take painful missteps as we walk into our future. Arguably, without answering the question, what is the nature of character? Our answers to other questions matter little. Though we may understand how gravity holds us on this earth, will we simply use this knowledge to escape its grasp to live our stunted lives on another planet? Though we may come to understand consciousness, will we know how to aim our consciousness to create great lives? Understanding character is an important and critical strategy for escaping the dangers that may be lurking in our current developmental trajectory. A critical pathway to creating a world filled with justice, humanity, wisdom, courage, temperance, and spirituality. I could have just as well kept the above graph the same, but instead of displaying progress over time, have plotted allocation of money and resources. And it points us to the importance of making this work a higher priority for funding. As greater resources are put towards this emerging science of character strengths, it forms a fulcrum, a point around which humanity can tip towards its better nature. But to set this tipping in motion, we need a lot more research to deepen our understanding. I'll just mention two of the yet to be explored topics that I think will be important. First, it will be helpful to understand the relationship between good behavior and bad behavior. We tend to think of honesty and dishonesty as two ends of a single continuum, as opposed to related but different dimensions controlled by different processes. But we know that honest people lie and that dishonest people tell the truth. And we need to better understand how the 24 character strengths work in different combinations. Think of the periodic table of elements and how 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen come together to form water. How do 2 parts creativity and 1 part prudence create a different behavioral compound than 2 parts creativity and 1 part bravery? Though we have much to learn, we know enough today so that taking action is not a task for tomorrow, but the challenge of today.